up for this talk tonight?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Okay, so as part of the project, what I'm supposed to do is look into different uh, mite management practices and look at sort of the pros and the cons. And one of the things we talked about was the use of the Russian honeybee. And so, what I'd like to talk to you about tonight is you have more experience with these bees than anybody I know. Um, what are some of the downsides to these bees? And the question that the sort of negative leaning question I tried to formulate is um, if the Russian honeybee is so good, why hasn't it become the dominant bee on the market?
Yeah, so first, first remind me again, what is your project? Is that Cornell Master Beekeeping thing, or
Yes, yes.
and I'm just curious how that is set up. What this is like your personal paper or
Yes,
project thing.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I'm in the second year of the program, and this module, this section we're doing is on mites and diseases, and we just finished this section on Varroa mite, and
Uh-huh.
it covered you know all the different IPM um, treatments for mites, all the chemical treatments for mites, all their and then all the positives and negatives of all of them. And anyway, the project for the end of this module is on alternative mite treatment, and I just thought it would be interesting to talk to you about your experience with the Russian bees, because quite frankly, when I got online with this idea originally, it was really hard for me to find negatives about the Russian bee. Um, and anyway, so I kind of like that kind of a contrasting kind of a conversation.
Um, yeah. Well, I have trouble coming up with negative things myself, but I think I understand why. But I've heard plenty of negative comments about the Russian bee, and I think the reason that it didn't become a more significant bee because it was so different from Italian bees that were, the most common, um, and the most, the ones that American beekeepers were most familiar with, and which, you know, did have and still do have a great, combination of characteristics. Uh, and the Russian bee was just so much more prone to swarming. They, they built up very slowly at first in the spring. It just, for someone who's used to Italian bees, um, it's almost seemed like something was wrong with them. They just weren't going anywhere. Then, but then a little bit later, they grow very quickly. Um, and I think just American beekeepers just didn't really want to deal with those things. That on a commercial scale, um, so much focus was moving towards this almond pollination that's just sucked, half of all the honeybees in the whole country, to that one little area every spring, and they want bees that will build up as quick as possible in the spring to be ready to pollinate the almonds. And, the Russian bees are still, just sort of waking up and putting on their slippers and going to get a cup of coffee when the the Italian bees have already had a few generations of new bees come along. So, and then producing honey with the Russian bees was difficult, and it was more difficult in areas where the honey flow came early, in the first half of the summer too. Because they were just so difficult to prevent them from swarming during that time. And it's not, but the Russian bees are really good honey gatherers. They're like per bee, they're very determined to gather as much as they can, and they have I think they have a long list of favorable characteristics, and they were a very good bee for us in the cold areas too. They're really good wintering bee and really good at provisioning themselves for winter. Requiring less effort of feeding, and almost they were almost too good at that. That almost became a weak point. Or from the beekeeper's point of view, they just put too much honey at the brood nest, or the colonies would just have, they use so little honey over the winter that they would have honey left over in the spring, and sometimes the space available for raising brood in the brood nest would be smaller than ideal in the spring. But anyway, I'm just really I thought because they had some real ability to coexist with the mites, I was perfectly willing to ignore their shortcomings or to work with them. It seemed like a very worthwhile trade-off to me. But I was a small beekeeper, and I was focused on producing queens and nucleus colonies too, as well as honey. But anyway, that's my take on why they didn't become more popular. And plus the miserable research community, they all act like they're buddy, at the meetings or whatever, but they're all in competition with each other too, and they just ganged up and dumped on Tom Rinderer and his bees, and just out of hand, rejected them, or said, they're not good because of this, or no good because of that. And meanwhile, Tom Rinder and his other people he worked with there at the lab just went quietly ahead, and they finally documented what the bees could do. The Baton Rouge Bee Lab hasn't used any treatments at all on the I don't know, they have 200 or 300 colonies of bees. They haven't used any treatments at all on them for over 20 years. And it's just, people just keep waiting for some kind of bee they can magically plug into their hive, and everything will be like it was before Varroa came. And it's just not going to happen. The beekeepers have to do their part of the work too.
Right. So like one of the negatives that you always hear about Russian bees is their aggressive nature. And to prepare for this, I went back and reread some of your essays, and you are just about the only person I've ever heard describe Russian bees as gentle.
Yeah, well, another person that I've heard described that way is Tom Rinderer. And I remember being at EAS when it was the only time I ever went to EAS, when it was in Ellicottville, New York. And he was there, and Bob Brackman, who was one of the original cooperators in the Russian bee program, was there. And Tom, get up to give his little spiel about the Russian bees. He said, among other things, he says, they're extremely gentle bees, and you could just hear this big guffaw from almost the whole audience. They just didn't believe him. And then when I gave my little demonstration and stuff, and I was talking about it, I said, I'm going to just second everything that Tom said about them. And I'm sure that what happened was that the Russian bees, they are very gentle. They're carniolan type bee, and they're very gentle, just like carniolans are. whether it was actually a pure Russian bee from the bee lab or their cooperators or from somewhere else. And then, almost all of these queens were open mated, and there's hardly any Russian bees, in the background for these queens to mate with. And so they were all hybrids. And I don't know if I can't remember if I said it in my actual article when I first described the Russian bee, but I mean, I kind of consider that they need to be, Russian mated to Russian, at least 75% of the drones is my estimate, and to consider them, that they'll retain the Russian characteristics. And I just don't think hardly any of the queens that were sold as Russian bees and still perhaps, meet that standard.
Well, it would seem to me then it would be difficult to get the Russian bee out there, because to maintain that you would need to flood the zone with Russian drones.
They needed people to, and that was part of the reason. Part of the reason they didn't become more popular was because hardly anybody, took them on as a serious project, that, or who really devoted their apiary to them, or who were willing to, to change their whole apiary. But maybe it's because, there's so few people that have an actual isolated mating yard, which I do have, and, my isolated mating yard is not as isolated as it used to be, but in the early years when I had the Russian bees, it was quite isolated. And, I was even, when I started with, when I really wanted to work on Varroa seriously, I had the Russian bees, but I was testing anything that was supposed to have, some ability to coexist with the mites. There was, an SMR bee, which they later changed the name to VHF, I think, but that came from the Baton Rouge Bee Lab that was, created by inbreeding some survivors that they had found, and other survivor bees that people sent me. But even though some of those bees, I wanted to keep my genetics from getting too inbred, or too close. I was trying to be careful to have, to start with enough queens of different, that were unrelated to each other, and gradually let them, combine together. And they all these other bees that were very different from the Russian bees, SMR bee, the other survivor bees people sent me, they all, lines that were started from them all became indistinguishable from the Russian lines, after, those genes were definitely dominating, and that was all done at my isolated mating yard.
Right. Now, are you still importing to your operation Russian stock from the Russian Bee Breeders Association?
No, I get, I have gotten bees occasionally from Bob Brackman, he's not in the organization anymore, but who was, an original member and was in it for many years. And Chris Baldwin, my friend, the beekeeper who migrates from South Dakota to Texas and converted his whole operation to the Russian bees, with the breeder queens from the bee lab, when they were coming from there, and who hasn't treated his bees at all. He has, he had about 1,500 and also from the Glen apiaries when they were selling the Russian bees also. And so I started, I tried to get as much genetic material that I could, really try to keep somewhat separate, at least at first. And then, again, gradually just build up my own families from that. And that's still what, was the basis of mine. But I'm not, I can't claim that. I call my bees Russian-based now. And my isolated mating yard is not as isolated as it used to be. There's just, so many hobby beekeepers keep popping up there, even though it's not a very good place to keep bees year-round. But, everybody wants to do something for the bees, or they think it would be a great hobby, and it is a great hobby, but that's a difficult place up there to keep bees alive year-round. And so anyway, what happened with me is I had enough success, when we got into the fourth year, the fifth year, the sixth year, and, the strength, I made the whole apiary smaller in order to deal with the pearl mite, to be able to keep better track of the families and be able to spend more time with each colony. I felt like that was going to be important, and I think it was. But then once they started to really catch on, I was just having less and less trouble with weak colonies or keeping them alive. And it just grew back to its original size. And I got to the point in like 2016 when it almost seemed like, it had gone back to keeping bees the way I did before the Varroa came, and I stopped keeping really close track of all the queens. It seemed like I could grasp off of good queens. I didn't pay as much attention to make sure we stopped clipping the queens from the isolation apiary. And again, that's partly because I have a commercial business. It's not my only source of income. And, my main goal is to try and have a decent way of life, to living from the apiary and not have to have another job or another source of income. And, so I'm not trying to prove something to anyone, that this bee is better, my bee is better than anyone else, or that I have, some special bee that will do this and do that. It helps me make a living. And, that's my main goal, is just to be able to, to work outdoors and to have my own business. So, that's the basis that I use to make decisions. And, I'm always changing what I'm doing. And, now, like I said, 2016, spring of 2016, 90% of the bees survived the winter. And, there just wasn't a single one out of all the survivors that really looked bad. They just were in great shape. They took off, and that was a real high point, right there. But that very fall, there was some new pattern just started to emerge when the bees started to dwindle away, very early in the fall. And even though 2016 was a really good summer, and usually a summer with a really good honey flow would be quite favorable for the bees to winter and the following winter. But that winter after the spring of 2017, the bees, there was the first big loss that I had for a while. And it was the same, not just with my bees. That was kind of across the board. Everyone was having, so there was a new pattern and some new factor, coming in, and we still don't know. And since then, I've had a couple other bad winters, including last winter. But we just don't know if this all is attributed to the viruses, or I am quite sure that now we're definitely feeling the effects of these new insecticides and the seed treatment on corn, the past, to show and to prove. And so anyway, that's what I consider to be the real existential problem for bees now. I've sort of changed my focus, and you might have noticed in the last thing I had in the bee culture, just my little summary of my Epomodia talk.
Yes.
Yeah, that this varroa mite thing. There have been ways of dealing with the varroa mites without treatments available since the Russian bees have come. And I'm not the only one, and they were not the only pathway out of it either. But just the industry has chosen not to concentrate on that, not to focus on it, not to work hard on it, and they're still struggling with trying to find treatments and all the problems that go along with that, just like insecticide use in all of agriculture. But anyway, yes, that's it's the varroa mite is the thing that really touched off this decline in bees and this real crisis of beekeeping and having enough colonies to pollinate. But it's really I believe it's really the degradation of the environment that is the real existential threat to beekeeping.
That, and along with climate change.
Yeah, well, that's part of the environment, I guess. I would include that there. But I think the bees are quite adaptable to climate problems, or more adaptable to them than they are to toxins in the environment.
I had a last year. I had a loss of colonies, and when I opened them up in the spring and started trying to examine them, there was plenty of honey. There was no pollen. There was nothing. So so what I had concluded is that the fall before, the goldenrod, which I usually count on, failed. And looking back, we were in a very dry weather pattern, and I don't know if that was the cause or not. I don't know. Did you experience anything like that?
So you were saying last winter?
Yes.
You're describing colonies that died?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the goldenrod slough definitely failed last year. Last year was a really good year, honey year, and it was one of the anyway. I had just my bee yard here at the house where I do the grafting and everything. I have a large number of colonies there, but that year I had over 200 supers in that one bee yard.
Wow.
But the last couple didn't get filled up because the goldenrod just failed. Where my bee yard here at home is one of the few places I have that gets an actual goldenrod honey flow, and it just I still have a lot of honey there, but those last one and two supers I put on were just as empty when I took them off as when I put them on. So our goldenrod did fail. I don't know. Our bee inspector said there was really high virus levels in the bees, that died over the winter, and just right in the spring when you're collecting the old equipment and cleaning it out and everything, that's when the bee labs shut down. When the virus was just getting started, and things were shutting down. They quit, analyzing samples and stuff. So it wasn't possible to send them samples this spring. But I'm not sure why I had such a big loss last year, but it just since 2016 there has been another factor at work, whether they've really doubled down on, making sure people treat, and even, there's so many recommendations now. It used to be treating once a year, and now, they're recommending three or four treatments sometime. And I was really shocked when Randy Oliver, published in one of his columns that some of his beekeeper friends there in California treat their bees every month. So this is just getting way out of hand.
I just don't understand that at all because, especially for a commercial beekeeper, that's just got to totally blow the profit margin.
Yeah, I don't even know how expensive it is because I haven't used them, but yeah, just the labor of applying them. Um, but these guys in California, they are making a fortune from this almond thing. They're getting paid the same amount for their colonies to rent them as the people who bring them from Maine and from Florida. And the price, because they need so many, they have to bring them from Maine and Florida and everywhere in between. And so, the price is to include the cost of transporting them all the way across the country and back. And the beekeepers in California, it's just right in their backyard. And a lot of them gave up producing queens and packages and just did everything they could to maximize their number of colonies because it was so cheap to take them to the almond orchards. And, the bunch of them are making a huge fortune from this.
Yeah.
As long as they can keep their bees alive. So, it will pay for a lot of treatments, and especially when they formulate their own treatments from liquid amatraz instead of buying, the ready-made treatments. They can treat them for a fraction of the cost, and even, I don't keep up with everything they're doing or find out or anything, but, you can't go hearing about it. And I don't know if you saw that article about the Hilo bee breeding project in Hawaii in the last American Bee Journal. They were saying that there just hasn't been a huge market. Again, the beekeepers are not willing to work on bees that have varroa resistance, even when the lab can supply them, with some breeding stock. That, the amatraz, that's what they said, the amatraz is still working so well that they don't have the incentive to work on the varroa resistant stocks. Even when they're kind of handed it on a silver platter, it's just not acceptable to them if they have to,
Right.
raise their own for a few generations and, have some bigger losses, even if they might only have another 10% loss or something like that. It's still, they can still make more money that year by treating them all and, just making sure they all are strong for the almonds. So anyway, it's pretty sad to think that, during my career I watched beekeeping go from, one of the last parts of agriculture that was mostly, reasonable sized family businesses and where, almost every single one of them was opposed to pesticides and chemical agriculture. And then, once the varroa came along and we had to treat the bees just to keep them alive at the beginning, that so many that beekeeping just almost flip-flopped overnight into, some of the most enthusiastic pesticide users. Has continued that way.
Yeah, it's really been hard for me. Like I've been trying to, I came into this like a lot of dreamy-eyed hobbyist, and my hope was to raise bees and be as chemical free as possible. And it was impossible. It was like it was a total uphill battle. And I finally the last couple of years, I started having I've been using HopGuard and Formic Pro to some success. But ideally, I'd rather not use anything.
Yeah, and the you know the problem with all the treatments is that it's masking the colonies that are really good, that are you know that are really are dealing with the problems on their own, and you know you have we're kind of hobbled in a way by looking through everything through the eyes of science. Science is very limited in some ways. Scientists act as if the only things that exist are what they can see and what they can test. But it's just not true. And what's emerging now from the people who have spent a long time without treating the bees is that each untreated apiary has to be built up individually in its own location, and the stock that will really work there has to be grown there. I mean, of course, you have to start with something that's promising, but you have to improve it in your location for yourself. And that's why you hear just all over the world where people are doing this. It's the same with John Keefus in France, and it's when I send queens to Bob Brackman or Chris Baldwin, they never do as well for them as their own bees are doing in the first generation. And it's the same when they send their bees to me. They are never quite as good as the bees I have already here. But if you continue with the best of the ones you raise from them, and they get mated mostly with your bees here, and then they can become really just as good. But it takes a few years. And have you seen these articles by Terry Combs?
No, I haven't. I'll look them up though.
Yeah. I think he's because the whole time I've been doing this, and I talk about it at the meetings or whatever, and there are just so many, the commercial beekeepers, they just don't want to hear about it. Mostly, it's just too much work, or there's way too many losses. No, I could never do that. But the hobby bee, there's so many hobby beekeepers who would just love to keep their bees without treatments. And I just had to always say, I don't have a great answer for hobby beekeeping. I have a way of controlling the mating. I have a large number of colonies to choose from. Those are things you can't do as a hobbyist. But this guy, Terry Combs, figured out a way to do it. And he succeeded with like 20 colonies. And so I think he has what everybody sort of wants.
Now, on this breeding program idea, myself and several other members of the Champlain Valley beekeepers, we've started working together to try to create our own locally adapted bees. But we're only in like year 2. So we've got a ways to go with that, and we still have a lot to learn, obviously.
Yeah, but that's good. That's good. So do you have like a mating area where you have most of the bees, where you control most of the bees, or?
Well, it purely by accident, two of these members live relatively close to each other, and so that sort of has by default become the major mating yard. But then, like where I live in Saranac, where you came to give your talk, I'm fairly isolated as far as other beekeepers go. So what I'm hoping at my place is, as we're finding queens, good temperament, good production, some hygienic behavior, all the as many pluses as we could throw in. I'm hoping to bring them here to be drone mothers, and also a breeding stock to sort of kind of pull them back out of the the more contaminated area of down deeper in the Champlain Valley.
You mean contaminated by having more beekeepers around?
Yeah. There's a lot more hobbyists, a lot more package bees that are coming in from down south, and just as you were talking about the bees for almond pollination. I mean, that's the bee breeders, all they want to do is crank out packages, so they're not necessarily motivated to put out bees that are have all these varroa resistant and traits. They want mass numbers.
Yeah, and that's why the Russian bee, was not a bee they wanted to use, because it's not a huge brood rearing bee. Someone who raises packages wants a bee that will raise a lot of young bees. And the Russian bees, it's sort of like they do the same work as an Italian colony with about 1/3 of the bees. Each bee lives longer or works harder, or both, probably.
The problem that I keep running into though is the availability of locally adapted bees. I've been on your list for some time, and I've gotten queens from your friend Troy. Is that his name?
Yeah, Troy Hall.
Troy Hall, yes. I've gotten from him, and I try to cast about because I want to get bees, that would be the least likely to have any connection, and it's hard. I mean, they get the orders are placed a year in advance, and then this last couple of years you've had some setbacks with your queen rearing, and that makes it even. I mean, it's good for you because it increases demand, but it's hard for a guy like me to break in.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. I feel for you. It's just the demand for local bees is just many times the supply, and and I'm on the I'm trying to part of the reason I've gotten so behind on all my customer list was for two reasons. I mean for three reasons. I did have some bigger setbacks, and I let my list get way too big. Right, during 2016 when the bees did so well, we sold so many nukes in the spring of 2016. I just thought, wow, this is going to go back to the way it was before, and I just let my list get way too long. And at the same time, now I've decided I have to keep making the apiary a little bit smaller every year so I can keep doing most of the work myself. I decided I don't want to try to keep it at a certain size and do it with hired people, and then sell it all at once to someone. I want to try to keep doing. To stay healthy, I need to keep doing the work myself, and so I quit selling regular production queens, and now I'm just every year I'm trying to force myself to make the apiary a little bit smaller, just with a few fewer colonies. It's still almost the same size it was, except for that other queen rearing part. But anyway, so that's what all those things are going on, at the same time.
Well, in your writings, you did talk about the ebb and flow of the apiary, so that's just where we are with this one, I suppose.
Yeah, and again, that's just whatever these new factors are since 2016. Whether apiary. But all of his bees he's had since then, which is, going on, I can't remember, 15 years or maybe more than that, have all descended from that one colony. And he doesn't have a way. He has other beekeepers around him, and now he believes that's not bad, that's good, that the important thing is selecting the matron line, the queen line, and but he, again, you should have him describe it to you, but as I understand it, if he has 20 colonies come through the winter, and he hasn't lost hardly a single colony for several years now over the winter.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, he's just he was a coal miner. He just, and beekeeping was his hobby, but his other hobby was raising goldfish, and he was a goldfish breeder.
No kidding.
And he used the methods that he learned from breeding goldfish with his bees, adapted to it, which involved taking lots and lots of notes. So he wrote 3 articles in the ABJ from a few years ago. You should look them up where he doesn't describe everything about his system, but he describes his record keeping, which is more than most people would do. I mean, he did it because it was his hobby. It was his thing. He was really into already with his fish, and now he realizes he didn't have to keep such detailed records of every colony. But as I understand it, he comes through the winter with 20 colonies or whatever, and then he splits most of them up, either in 2 or in 3, and lets each part raise their own queen. But he gets the best colonies raised more than the others. You gotta ask him.
I definitely will look him up and hopefully he'll talk to me.
His articles are really excellent, and he also reads a lot, and so he can refer to other people's things. And I keep telling he has a little bit of an inferiority complex, because he's like so many people who just bamboozled by this whole science thing, but he understands that beekeepers and farmers often have to solve their own problems and sometimes do a better job.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, Kirk, thank you so much. I appreciate your talking to me. I hope you have a quiet winter and a good survival rate come springtime.